Okay. So, Prasanto sir, can we start now?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Okay. So, good afternoon, all the participants of today's webinar. So, we are going to start today's session now. So, already most of our participants, they have already joined us in Zoom platform and also in YouTube. So we are now going to start this session formally. So this webinar we are organizing today in collaboration of two colleges. So KBR College and Masbat College. So here I am Mr. Inku Nath from KBR College, Department of English, and my college and the Department of English and Department of Education from Masbat College. So we have jointly organized this webinar, and this webinar, at the very beginning of this webinar, we are now going to start the session with the national anthem of our country. So we are now going to start the national anthem. For listening to our national anthem. So now we are presenting the details of our webinar. So in our screen, we are able to see the poster of our webinar. So here it is a one-day national webinar, and the topic is literature in pandemic times. And it is jointly organized by Masbat College and KBR College. So we are organizing the webinar, and now we welcome all our participants. So in our screen, it is the welcome to all our participants, and here comes the topic of the webinar. So today's topic is literature in pandemic times. So today is 9th August 2020. So this is our topic, literature in pandemic times. So as I have already mentioned, this webinar, it is organized by the Department of English, Kolaguru Vishnurabha College, KBR College, and Department of English and Education, Masbat College. So it is organized by jointly by KBR College and Masbat College. So in our next screen, we are able to see our most respectable Dr. Anjali Bajpai Madam. So Dr. Anjali Bajpai Madam, she will inaugurate our webinar officially. So Dr. Anjali Bajpai Madam, she is the professor of Benares Hindu University. So she has already joined us, and she will inaugurate our session officially. Now we go to the next screen. So here comes our main resource person. So our resource person, Honorable Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das sir. So Prasanto Kumar Das sir, he is a professor of Tezpur Central University. We have invited him as our resource person today. So in our screen now, we are presenting the details about the organizing committee. So in this organizing committee, at the left top, it is myself, and then our principal sir, Dr. Pradeep Kumar Sharma sir, principal of Masbat College, and then Mohammad Tazem Ali sir, he is principal of Kabir College. Then Mr. Ramesh Shah, he is the HOD of English, Masbat College. And then bottom left, Mr. Joyanto Kolita, Department of Education, he is HOD. And then Mr. Ornav Setia, he is technical expert. Then our junior technical assistant is Mr. Polazuti Nath. And then Mrs. Swapna Pal Nath, Department of MIL. And then Mr. Bizyard Baglari, Department of English, Masbat College. So in our organizing committee, so we are here, and now I am closing the screen.
Ready, Asana? Okay.
So now I request Mr. Joyanto Kolita to carry forward the program. So as for our agenda, our next part is welcome speech from principal sir. So here our principal sir, Pradeep Kumar Sharma sir, he has joined, but Mohammad Tazem Ali sir, he is still unable to join us because of some technical issues. So now I request Joyanto Kolita, co-convener of this webinar, to carry forward the program. Over to Joyanto Kolita.
Thank you, Mr. Nath. This is Joyanto Kolita, SOD Department of Education, and good afternoon to all respected esteemed participants, resource persons, and today's guest. Now, as per agenda, it is welcome speech by Principal Masbat College. So on behalf of the both the colleges, I request Dr. Pradeep Kumar Sharma, sir, Principal Masbat College, to deliver his welcome speech. Sir, please, over to you.
Okay. Thank you. At the outset, good afternoon to all. মই প্ৰথমতে সকলোলৈ মোৰ ফালৰ পৰা আন্তৰিক অভিনন্দন জ্ঞাপন কৰিছো। Today's webinar, one day national webinar topic is literature.
Continue, bro.
Currently organized by Department of English and Department of English KBRD College and Masbat College. At first, I welcome to Dr. Anjali Bajpayee, Professor Benares Hindu University, who will inaugurate our session, and Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das, Professor Tezpur Central University, research person of this program, along with Principal KBR College, Mohammad Tazem Ali, a coordinator of both colleges, Mr. Impunat, Joyanto Kolita, Ramesh Chandra Shah, and Bizyard Baglari, and all participants from the different corners of India. I, on behalf of organizing authority, welcome all of you for my heart. Friends, Literature may not explain any or type of things such as pandemics, even as modern science sometimes cannot, but it does become source of consolation, a way of sharing our common humanist corners, and in its own way provide the deepest and most insightful record at event. Pandemics are past diseases like plague, smallpox, influenza, and cholera, ruin families, destroy towns, and leave a generation such and such. Devastation caused by the outbreak impacted many major writers across India. Rabindranath Tagore, Prem, Susan Tripathi, Fakir Mohan Senapati, etc., giving birth hunting poems, short stories, and novels. So, friends, we will know about all the pandemics later.
Yes. Thank
So
you.
network failure, perhaps.
Thank you, Dr. Pradip Kumar Sharma, sir, Principal, Masbat College, for your valuable speech. This welcome speech to the participants and all. Now, as per agenda, it is.
So, Mr. Kolita, I interfere you. So,
Yeah.
actually, what is happening? The participants are not able to open their videos. So, our technical assistant Orna Setia, if any issues are here, please try to solve it. The participants are not able to open their videos. Okay, Jantapur Kolita, please carry forward.
Uh, uh, okay. Now it is time to inaugurate our session formally. So, respected principals of both the colleges, resource person, chief guest, and all the esteemed participants, I am profusely overjoyed to take the opportunity to introduce our chief guest, come inaugurator. She is none other than Dr. Anjali Bajpai. She is the professor in education, Banaras Hindu University. Professor Bajpai Madam specializes in area of science, teaching, learning, curriculum, educational technology, and contemporary issues in education. She has been associated with Banaras Hindu University for last 30 years, first as a student and then as a faculty, joined Banaras Hindu University as lecturer in the year 1997. She is a member of various committee of Banaras Hindu University, like grievance cells, research development committee, school board, residential allotment committee, etc., and involved in organizing seminars, refresher courses, etc. Having guided about a dozen of PhD scholars, she has published more than 36 papers in various national journals, co-authored 2 books, and done a minor project and a major UGC project. She has participated in many national and international seminars and conferences. Associated with IGNO Center, she has been the coordinator of AMET part-time, a course for in-service teachers of the education faculty, Banaras Hindu University till 2016. She presented proposal of School of Education of Faculty of Education for the PMMM and MTT scheme of MHRD and Banaras Hindu University has granted the School of Education in November 2016. Presently, Dr. Baspe is the coordinator, Center of Curriculum, Policy and Research. She has also been associated with ICSSR, NCTE, and UGC as member of various committees. So, with this very brief introduction, I would like to welcome and request Professor Anjali Baspe, Madam, to deliver her inaugural speech. Please, Madam, over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Katya, and thank you, Dr. Nath, for introducing me so elaborately and in such nice words. First of all, I will thank your principal of both the colleges, Dr. Sharma and Dr. Ali, for giving me this opportunity to be part of this webinar as the inaugurator. As we know, that language is a very important part of our communication. Like in education, we say if you have to transfer knowledge, it has to be verbal or non-verbal. When we see to the verbal component, it is through the languages which we speak. Now, as we know, we are a very rich country with a lot of language diversity. And across the world, also, language has been a part of communication to various people of various times. Gradually, as we see language teaching, we see that how to converse or how to convey what you want to teach to our students is a very important part. So besides communication, language has also its rich part in the literature which it has. So when we can say a language is basically what we speak, and what we speak is also it depends upon what we read about that language, and that part of language which we read, which we have as a source of various times, various how we have to speak, what is written, that is the part of language that we consider as literature. Now, if you come to literature of any language, it is influenced by the times where this literature is being written. Like if you see various countries, if you see some literature of the times when there has been some struggle, there has been some movement, there has been some sort of revolution, the literature of that time is affected, is influenced by what movement is taking place in the society. So when we talk of literature, we say the things which are written in a literature of any language, it is influenced by the social, the political, and also the revolutionary movements of that time. If we see at present times, we are facing a very, you can say, a crucial situation where whatever we are facing, this has to be written, and if it has to be transferred to generations to come. Earlier also, when there are clippings in the newspapers about the 1918 pandemic of similar nature, we see those cuttings, those photographs help us to understand what happened that time. So literature in the pandemic times basically thinks of two things: how what we are writing will be transferred as a knowledge source in the times to come. That is, what we have written today might help the future generation to understand the situation of the society, the mindset of the people, the action taken by the government at this present time. Also, this also affects the major surrounding, like all of us scholars today, we are communicating through the online mode. maybe the literature of generations to come will be some online cloud where we may not have novels, we may not have written text material, we may have clouds which will have this content which will be freely available to everyone in the world. Also, one more thing, when I would say I would be sharing this, I would say how this literature, originally the texts were few because we did not have the printing machines. When the printing machines came, then the texts, the books became freely available to people. So when we say today, when we are talking of these present time, whatever we are discussing, whatever we are writing, we are sharing with large number of people, and this sharing will also be taken forward in times to come, because it will be preserved in form of online content in clouds. As it is said that still we can, if we can come to that frequency, we can hear what was said by Krishna in Gita in the era of Mahabharata, if we can come to that frequency. Similarly, the literature of today, if it is preserved in a proper manner, it will help the generations to come, how the things changed, how people's lifestyle changed, how thinking process changed, how the environment was affected by this pandemic. It has affected the humans, but it has also given a very positive impact on the environment. We had WhatsApp photographs of people showing that from Jalandhar we can see the Himalayan mountains. We have people showing that penguins, the whales, the seas, the rivers, they have become all clear. So this pandemic times, the literature which will be there of the present COVID times, maybe it will be referring to all these things, and how suddenly there was a change in technology, and how people became more or we can say we are still dependent on technology, how people could integrate technology into teaching learning process. So all these things, when we talk of pandemic times and literature related to it, we can talk of this. And I'm sure our esteemed Professor Das will be talking of all these things in his resource lecture. And I'm actually very fortunate to be here as part of your webinar to inaugurate this webinar. I wish you all the best, and I'm sure the deliberations of Professor Das will be giving us a new perspective of literature in pandemic times. Over to you, Dr. Katya, and I inaugurate this webinar formally.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anjali Bajpayee, Madam, for kindly accepting our invitation and inaugurate the session with your kind, beautiful, and thought-provoking deliberation. Actually, when I contact you, you actually say that this is the topic is related to literature. So I am the faculty of education. You denied actually, but I requested, and you finally accepted, and now it is proved that you have covered up all the parts of the topic. So I am especially thankful to you, and thank you, Madam, for giving us such your valuable time. And
Dr. Katya, literature has been something which I like to read. It has not been my formal discipline of study, but I have read Premchand, I have read Hardy, I have read the modern writers of today, and I feel that literature has a lot of impact. The professors of literature can express their ideas in a much better way than any of us, and I'm sure Professor Das will be showing that, and he'll be deliberating on that. And that is why I was a bit hesitant when you told me that. So thank you, Dr. Katya, once again.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you. And now I also request you to be with us till the end of the webinar, because
sure.
it's a very thank you, Madam. Now I request Inkunath to carry over the next part of the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Jayanta Kolita, and I also offer my thank to Dr. Anjali Bajpayee, Madam, for her resourceful speech. So already she has given us a beautiful speech, and our program is officially inaugurated now. So as per our agenda, so now it is the time to tell about the objective of today's webinar. So here I am going to say something about the objective of today's webinar. So, okay. So good afternoon once again. So all our participants and our most respectful Dr. Prasanta Kumar Das sir, Dr. Anjali Bajpai madam, and all our esteemed participants. So here I am Mr. Inku Nath from KBR College, joint convener of today's webinar. So now, as per our agenda, I am going to tell something about the objective of today's webinar. So the primary objective of today's webinar is to explore how literature has passed through several situations in human history. So we all know that literature always deals with human life. So whatever happens in human life or in the society always get reflected in literature. So one among such serious events that has affected human life severely is the pandemics. So perhaps for long years, the human beings, were not concerned about what pandemic is or how pandemic affects. So in the recent time, we are suffering from this corona virus, that is COVID-19 pandemic. And that is why we are now quite aware about the effect of pandemics. So these pandemics have occurred in this art from the earliest time. So from the prehistoric time to the present day, mankind has suffered from several pandemics like plagues. So plagues occurred in our planet so from many times, and it has led the people to suffer in the most severe way. So apart from plagues, there have occurred yellow fever, different types of flu, polio, Spanish flu, Asian flu, then AIDS, then swine flu, then we heard about Ebola, then we heard about Zika virus, and in that way, now we are suffering and we are fighting against COVID-19. So in a way, pandemic is quite familiar before us. So these pandemics have wiped out a large number of human population, and the suffering of mankind is beyond imagination. And during this period, human activities are also affected in the most unprecedented way. The literary practices have also passed through these stages, and it is affected badly, or it has focused on that suffering of mankind. So to explore into that field, we have organized this webinar with the title Literature in the Pandemic Times. So to discuss about this topic, we have, with the organizing committee, we have invited our resource person, so Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das sir from Tezpur University. So it is all about the objective of today's webinar. So now, as for our agenda, so it is the time for a brief introduction about our resource person. So whatever I have said about the objective of today's webinar, so everything is from a brief assumption of me only. So our resource person, Prasanto Kumar Das sir, so he will tell in details, he will present in details, he will say everything. So now, as per our agenda, so we are going to request Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das sir for his speech. But before it, I want to present a brief introduction about Prasanto Kumar Das sir before our participants. So Prasanto Kumar Das sir is with the Department of English in Tezpur Central University. He is currently the Dean of School of Humanities and Social Sciences. So his research interests are in the areas of Indian writing in English, book history, and English literature. So he has edited a new edition of an out-of-print biography of Miles Bronson in a far country. So Miles Bronson, so we all know about him. So his contribution in India, in Assam. So he has just completed a research paper. So Dr. Das sir has completed a research paper on the Sibsagar Mission Press titled The American Baptist Missionaries and the Making of Modern Assam. So this writing of Dr. Prasanta Das sir, so it is a very influencing writing and it will come soon. And he, our Honorable Prasanta Das sir, so he has received the Fulbright Fellowship Award twice. So this has enabled him to go to the Cornell University and Harvard University. So this is a brief introduction about our Honorable Sir, Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das sir. So after this, now I request Dr. Prasanto Das sir to present his speech. So this is the most expected moment of our webinar. So in this webinar, as per our invitation, Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das sir, so he has been present with us. So now I request Dr. Das sir. So over to you, Das sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Inkunath, for that very kind introduction. And also thank you because you're the person I've been in touch with. So you are the one who invited me. So I thank you especially. But I would also like to thank the members of the organizing committee, the principals of the two colleges, and of course, not forgetting our distinguished inaugurator and chief guest of this session, Dr. Prasanjali Bajpayee. So let me say that I'm honored indeed to be here and very happy to be part of this webinar. All right, now I should clarify that when Dr. Sharma, Principal Dr. Sharma was talking, making his remarks, he referred to some works in regional languages. My domain happens to be English literature. I've been a teacher of English literature. So let me stick to my domain. So the works I'll be talking about will be from the Western canon and from English literature. However, one of the good things of this COVID-19 pandemic will be that works in our languages, in the various Indian languages that deal with pandemics or epidemics or disease, will now receive new attention. We know that works in English often receive more attention than works in our own languages. And one of the things I said of this COVID-19 pandemic will be that there will be more attention given to works in our own languages which deal with such events. So I have some slides which I will now call up on my screen, and I hope you can see them. Give me a minute, please. I'll just call it up. Right. Can you confirm for me that your screen? Hello?
Yes, sir.
You can see it. All right.
Yeah.
So let me go. This first screen is not very nice. Let me now move to the first. What is actually my first slide that I have. Now, first of all, I would like to begin with this whole argument about the usefulness of literature. And Professor Bajpayee made certain comments about how literature has a role to play. I'm interested in this question because, we are now currently in this pandemic, which is the first pandemic of the age of information. There have been pandemics since antiquity. But then this current pandemic is actually the first pandemic of the information age. And this is an age of science also. And we have scientific colleagues, they're contributing. There are researchers who are trying to come up with a vaccine, and there are people who are, making hand sanitizers, and we're leading our lives on the basis of scientific advice. Medical science tells us to wear a mask, so we wear masks. Medical science tells us to maintain social distancing. That is how we are living our lives. So science is indeed, we are leading our lives according to scientific advice. And one way in which the current pandemic differs from all previous pandemics is probably in this, that we no longer blame God. We don't think it's an act of God. We believe that there are scientific reasons, and our scientists
So
So I was talking about the role of science, the role of science and how science obviously is useful, but poetry makes nothing happen, to quote W.H. Auden. But Auden was being ironical. He didn't actually believe this. He was when he wrote "Poetry makes nothing happen," he actually meant to say that poetry does have a role, and literature does have a role. What is the role that literature has? If you look at the last pandemic that we had, which was the Spanish flu of 1918 to 1920, you'll find that it was not even written by the major authors of the time, like Ernest Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald, John Dos Passos, the American novelist, and William Carlos Williams, a very prominent American poet. None of them wrote about the last pandemic, the Spanish flu. They wrote about the war, the First World War. The First World War happened alongside the Spanish flu. And so you have Hemingway writing novels about the First World War. But they totally ignored the last pandemic. Now, Professor Vajpayee also made the point, and it's in fact a true thing to say, that literature actually carries traces of the time in which it is written. It comes from a social context, it comes from a historical context, and literature carries those traces. But as I said, this was the case. These great, writers didn't actually write about the Spanish flu. That I don't think is going to be the case presently. But what literature does is it engages with what are known as the eternal verities: life, birth, death, and feelings like a mother's love for her child, the experience of falling in love. These are common experiences, and literature engages with such experiences. And we will find, my next slide, I will show you a list of some books that have dealt with the plague since antiquity and right up to now. The plague or pestilences, pandemics, epidemics have been a part of human history, and literature has in fact engaged with this. Now, coming to the question of literature and mental health. Well, you have the very sad case of this young actor, Sushant Singh Rajput. Now, I think what happens when you decide to opt out of life, when you decide to take your life, you are actually at a point where you do not see any meaning. Literature rescues us from that situation. You see, we are creatures that always search for meaning. We interpret. And we are without meanings, without interpretations, without certain patterns in life, unless we are sure of these, it's very difficult for us to lead life. Previously, religion, and even now in a country like India, religion supplies a lot of answers to life's problems. And that is exactly the role that literature has. So in other words, the actual contribution of literature is not so easy to quantify or show as it is in the case of scientific work. Literature will not give you a vaccine. But on the other hand, it gives you other things. And the rest of my talk is about these other things that literature does. But in a word, literature actually supplies you with meaning. Literature is a way of understanding our current predicament when we lead lives.
Excuse
And
me.
when I say literature, I should also include, though today I will not be talking about them, things like legends and myths. So these are things that structure your life. They give a structure to your life. Without these structures, your life would be meaningless and you'd see little point in leading life. Let me come to my next slide. So as I said, we have a long history of and a long list of works, pandemic-related works. And I have here for you just some of the very best known. Some of these are works that you would have read, others that you're probably planning to read. And I'm sure there are many other works which deal with the pandemics or epidemics, which are not on that list. This is a list of what you might call canonized writing or near canonized writing. It's a list of some of the great works, but there are other kinds of writing that have dealt with pandemics. And as I said, one of the things that's going to happen is that there will be, and there already is, a great interest now, and people will be writing and researching on the role of literature and pandemics. And in that process, you and I will come to know of many, many other works that deal with pandemics, including in our own languages. So at the top of my list, I have Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. This, is one of the great plays of the world. And Aristotle, in his Poetics, repeatedly praises this as an exemplary work of tragedy. And it was first performed about 429 BC. There was a great plague at that point in Athens, in the city of Athens. And the starting point of Oedipus Rex is that plague. The great historian, and one of the first historians, in fact, Thucydides, also wrote about this same plague. This is a work that he wrote around 431 BC, and it is the history of the Peloponnesian Wars. Now, Thucydides himself was a victim. He was infected by the Black Plague, and he has a very accurate and scientific description of the symptoms of the plague. And even today, when medical scientists study, even pestilences that have taken place in the past, and when they go to that description, they find it very, very accurate. Next on my list, I have the work by Boccaccio.
Sir, I beg pardon, sir. Your video is not coming, sir, and slide is also not visible, sir. Sorry for the intervention, sir.
No, I'm so glad for the feedback because I didn't know, really. I didn't know. I had no idea what's happening. Let me try and adjust this problem because is that the slides, there's a little point in my carrying on. Can you see it now?
No, sir.
Is it better now? No.
No, sir.
Oh.
Screen is not visible here.
Now? Not even now?
Not even now, sir.
All right, let me then carry on without the slide. Okay, next I have on my, next I would like to talk about Boccaccio, the Italian writer, Boccaccio, his Decameron. Now this again is a work that is well known. And in this work, the frame story is that of the Black Plague of 1348. Now, frame story meaning that there is a story, a main story, and within that there are other stories. The main story is about a number of characters who move from the city to the countryside, and they move because there is a plague going on. So that is an instance of social distancing. And when they go to the countryside, they have a problem of time, how to spend their time. So what they do is each of them decides to tell 10 stories. So there are 10 characters, and in time you have then 100 stories. So the frame story is that of the plague. And the stories that are told within that frame story are, as you probably know, and some of you may have read these stories, they are what you might call stories that feature low kind of comedy. Low kind of comedy. There are references to, things that you normally would not mention in decent society. They're dirty jokes. In fact, there's some filthy jokes. But the point about these jokes is that they are a kind of celebration of life. Outside there is death. Inside, these characters seem to be reveling in life. They're celebrating life, and their stories are full of vitality and just for living. After this, I have another work, which is Peeps Diary. This again is a famous diary, probably the most famous diary written in English. And you probably know that Pepys wrote this diary secretly because he was confiding many secrets in his diary. So this was something that he wrote between
Sir, your voice is not coming.
There is some problem with the net, actually, I think. I normally don't have problems with the net, but today is the first day that I'm having very serious problems with the net.
Yes, sir. Today we have. Okay, sir. Continue.
Okay. So I was talking about Pepys' diary, which he wrote secretly between 1660 and 1669. And Pepys' diary records the plague of 1665. That was a major plague. And Pepys in his diary tells us what it was like to live in London in the year 1665. The plague of 1665 also features in a novel by Daniel Defoe. The novel is called A Journal of the Plague Year. Now, sometimes people talk of this as a record, a journalistic record. But Defoe was only about 5 years old when the plague of 1665 occurred. He was born in 1660. Therefore, Defoe had no first-hand experience of the plague. And this is an imaginative reconstruction of the plague of 1665. I will return to these works. Then we have a work by Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley, who gave us the famous work Frankenstein, also wrote a book called The Last Man. And the astonishing thing is that she predicted in this book a plague that would happen in the 21st century, at the end of the 21st century. And this plague would destroy everybody except one man. And the title of this particular work, particular novel, is The Last Man. So The Last Man has actually come back into focus now. Mary Shelley's Last Man was in a way suppressed, not read, but in recent years, because of climate change and other reasons, this has become a novel that people are now returning to. And because of this plague that we are in now, this novel is going to be read and written about a lot more in the future. Then I mentioned some American writers who ignored, American writers like Hemingway, who ignored the plague, the Spanish flu of 1918. The Spanish flu was the last major plague of the modern world, major pandemic of the modern world. Now, there is a writer called Catherine Annie Porter, who came up with a work called Pale Horse, Pale Rider. It's a short story, a long short story. It was published in 1939, and this is explicitly about the Spanish flu. So this is a work that is again getting attention now. And then there is a very famous book by Albert Camus, probably the first work that comes to mind when you talk about pandemic literature. This is The Plague. Now, Camus' plague is actually not about a real plague. It is a fictional plague. Camus did a certain amount of research, and in his novel, he writes about a fictional plague that happens in a small town. The small town is the town of Oran. Then you have a very popular writer, a writer of frightening stories, scary stories, Stephen King. Stephen King in 1978 actually wrote about a pandemic. And the book is called The Stand. Apart from this, there is the very well-known Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which came out in 1985. And there is a very great Italian novel, supposedly the greatest Italian novel by Alessandro Manzoni. It's called The Betrothed. This is about the Great Plague of Milan, which happened between the years 1629 and 31. Now, and I have skipped one or two works here, which are not so well known. There is a book, there is a novel called The Eyes of Darkness, 1981, by Dean Koontz. There is another work by Andre Brink called The Wall of the Plague, 1984. So there are these other works. And the latest work dealing with the plague, in fact, it's a work that deals with COVID-19, a book just published the other day by the British novelist Ali Smith. Ali Smith, called Summer. And in fact, yesterday there was an article, yesterday, that is the 8th of August, there's an article in the Guardian newspaper, and this you can access online. It's an article that has the headline, "The COVID novels are arriving." So there's an article that tells you that there are a number of novelists who are working on the current COVID-19 pandemic, and these novels are on their way. And Ali Smith's novel is already with us. So it's a pity that my screen share is not working, because I had this list which I could have shown it to you. But now I have my next slide, which again, obviously you can't see, but let me nevertheless try and speak to you about this, what is in this slide. The title of my slide is Recording Pandemic Lives and Times. One of the things that literature does is that it records. It records. Now, even journalism records, mind you. And for a long time, literature has been like journalism. It has been a record. But then there's only one of the things that literature does. But sometimes the journalistic reports and literary records are not quite the same thing. Because in literature, you have a kind of more of a kind of literary quality. Literary quality. What is this literary quality? As I said, it is about the actual living experience, and somehow it is works of literature. Just like a war novel probably gives you the actual experience of being in the war more than a journalistic piece of writing will. So anyway, there is Ezra Pound's famous statement that literature is news that stays news. So one of the things that literature does is it gives you news. And today, Oedipus's, Sophocles' Oedipus Rex is still in a sense news to us because it's about a plague, and we can relate to that. We can relate to that. Now, if you look at Oedipus's, Sophocles' Oedipus, what is interesting in this play is that Oedipus himself never imagines that he is the polluter. I think everybody knows the story of Oedipus Rex, that one day in the morning, Oedipus Rex is the king of Thebes, the great city, Thebes, the great city, Greek city. He's a leader, he's a ruler there, and he has become a ruler by killing an old man. One day while he was traveling, he came across an old man. There was an argument, and he killed that old man. Then he came to the city of Thebes, and he happened to marry the queen. What he didn't know was that the man he killed was his own father, and the woman he had married, the queen, was actually his own mother. So there is this entire story. But the play begins at what point? The play begins at this point when, in the morning, some citizens come to Oedipus and they tell him that there is a plague in our city and the gods are angry. So this is the difference between Oedipus's work and our times. It was not a scientific age. So the people in Thebes, they think that it is an act of God. And Oedipus then announces that, all right, let the polluter be found. Let that sinful creature be found. What he doesn't realize is that he himself is that sinful creature. And if there is a plague, the plague has been visited on Thebes because of him. Now, this not being able to imagine that he is the polluter, at the simplest level, we can see how today, for many of us, it's difficult to imagine that we may be carrying the virus. And that is why when we go out, when we meet others, we do not wear a mask. We somehow imagine that we are immune. So Sophocles' Oedipus gives you that experience. Then you have Thucydides' descriptions in his book I've already mentioned, that he himself was infected by the plague. And so his work records the experience of what it was like to be a man infected by the Black Plague. It was a very painful disease, much more painful than our current virus. And you have these descriptions in Thucydides. So an act of recording. Recording also occurs in Peeps' diary. Peeps writes in his diary about what it was like to live in London. Again, he talks about social distancing. People, though they do not exactly know what is how the virus is carried from person to person. We know much more about that now, but still they know that staying in groups is dangerous, and so there is social distancing. There are precautions taken. There is panic in the city of London. The rich people go to the countryside because they can afford to go. The poor have no choice but to stay in their very crowded rooms, houses. There is cruelty when someone is found having the plague. Other people avoid him. In fact, we have a saying that to avoid like the plague. So all of these things we can relate to because Pepys in his diary has written about it. In Camus' The Plague, you have a character called Cotard, who in the early part of the novel tries to commit suicide. But then as the plague takes over, what happens is Cotard forgets his suicidal thoughts. And the reason for that is the plague is everyone's problem. And because Cotard then becomes involved in a social problem, he forgets his own personal problems. Then you have Daniel Defoe's descriptions in the Journal of the Plague Year. You have also Boccaccio's descriptions, very powerful descriptions. And there is a Camus description in The Plague. Camus, interestingly enough, was not writing from first-hand experience. He did research. But though his book is fictional, the descriptions are extremely powerful, as anybody who has read Camus will know. So this is one of the roles that literature plays, it records. But there are other things that literature does. First of all, you have something called the imagination. You know, when I was talking about Plato and I was talking about Aristotle, Plato was a poet. Much of his writing is actually poetic, and his Greek, we are told, by those who can read Greek, is of a very high standard. However, Plato, as you all know, famously wanted to get rid of poets. He wanted to banish poets from his republic. And there were two reasons for that. First of all, he thought that poets do not actually reflect reality. A poet, when he talks about a chair, or a painter, when he paints a chair, is actually painting a second-hand reality. The ideal chair is in heaven. And what you have in real life is only an imitation of that ideal chair. The carpenter makes the ideal chair. What does the painter do? The painter paints the carpenter's chair. So in that sense, the painter's truth is twice removed from the ideal truth. So this is Plato. And Plato also believed that poets make you indulge in your emotions. You know, poets encourage you to cry. And he was not interested in that because one of the things that he was interested in was education, proper educational influences. And he was actually trying to create ideal citizens for his ideal republic. And he thought that it was not manly to cry, manly to give into emotions. And poets did exactly that. And therefore, and poets also wrote on a number of topics that he considered were not really the kind of topics that children should be subjected to. They wrote about lust, for instance. They wrote about anger. And these are things that human beings should try to keep at bay. So Plato was very, very negative on poets. But then the answer to that was given by Aristotle. Aristotle, in his famous work, Poetics, there is a part where he compares poetry with history. And he says that the historian is bound to record what has happened. He literally records what has happened. Poet, however, is not bound to record what literally happened. And in a sense, the poet, therefore, is more free to give you a kind of universal truth that the historian cannot give you, simply because the poet has something called the imagination. Now, that imagination, of course, has to be used responsibly. And here I point you to this fact that the literary imagination is something that is not to be scorned. Because, call to mind, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, written in 1818. Mary Shelley was a very young woman at that point. She herself was of only about 18 years. But her famous work, Frankenstein, is a warning to mankind about what happens when science becomes too proud, when science becomes irresponsible. Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, in her novel, creates a monster, a creature, because he wants to create life. But once he has created this big creature, he himself is horrified. And he turns his back on his creation. So it's a story about irresponsible science. It's a story about pride, wanting to play God. Now, it's not been verified, and we have to be careful with this, but did COVID-19 originate in a laboratory in Wuhan, China? As I said, there's no clarity on this. It has been denied. So it'll take many, many years for us to realize the truth. But if so, then it is indeed a reminder that science can overreach itself. Science, which can also play a benevolent role, and we're hoping it will give us a vaccine, can also overreach itself. And this warning was given by a young lady writing in 1818. So look at the astonishing power of the literary imagination. Sometimes I feel that we do not know how to read. Had we paid attention to some of these works, then we may not have been in our current predicament. Had we really paid attention to works like this, or even to a work like Sophocles' Oedipus, to which I will return. And the same Mary Shelley, after writing Frankenstein in 1818, gave us a novel called The Last Man, to which I've already referred, in which he imagined the 21st century in which there would be a pandemic and the whole world would be destroyed. Now, this was a work that we did not even pay attention to. Frankenstein is a classic. It is read, it is taught, but we didn't read The Last Man. And there you have a warning given as early as 1826 about the predicament that we find ourselves in. Let me also remind you of another work, which is not a work of pandemic-related work as such, but this is H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, 1898. Now, in The War of the Worlds, as you probably know, and there's also a famous film made from this book, Martians, aliens invade the world. And what happens then? They come from a superior civilization, they're superior creatures, the technology is superior, and we human beings are no match for them. They begin to take over the world. And when H.G. Wells was writing this, he was also thinking about colonialism, white people going to Australia, white people coming to a country like India, white people going to South America. Now, in this story, what happens eventually? How are the Martians, the aliens, ultimately defeated? Human beings cannot do it. Human beings are too weak. Our technology is too weak to tackle them. We do not know how to deal with them, how to counter them. What happens is the aliens start dying off one by one. And why do they die off? They die off because they come from a different world and their immune systems cannot handle the bacteria and the virus of our world. So even a common cold can kill and does kill these aliens who invade Earth. So this is a story about the power of the virus, a little virus. I mean, right now, a little virus is keeping us at home. We are hiding from a little virus, a virus that can't even see with the naked eye. So here again, there's a reminder of nature, of things that we don't know and that we do not, in our pride, we disregard. So literature plays this kind of a role if we only know how to pay attention. So this was my slide on pandemics and the literary imagination. Allow me to go to my next slide, which is about literature and the politics of pandemics. Now, I will go back to Sophocles' Oedipus or Oedipus Rex. As I said, that is a story. I was recounting you the story to you. This is a story about a king who is ruling, and then he finds that the plague has arrived in a city. And the citizens come to him for a solution, and he orders that a solution be found. And Oedipus, Sophocles' Oedipus is also like a detective story, because once he gives that order and people begin to examine, they begin to search, the story about his own past comes to light. The fact that he had killed his father and married his own mother, which is why the gods are angry. But when Oedipus orders that let that sinful thing be found, what he is doing is he is assuming responsibility. This is a personal responsibility and also a governmental responsibility. He's the ruler. Now, there are problems that we cannot solve on an individual level. There are many problems in our personal lives which only we can handle, you and I can handle, problems in our personal lives. But take something like pollution, take environmental degradation, and take the pandemic. These are not problems that you can solve on a personal basis. This is where you need governmental responsibility. So Oedipus Rex reminds us of governmental responsibility. Oedipus, in fact, is a good king, which is why he cares for his people. And at the end, he does locate that which is the virus, which is himself. Now, the governmental responsibility has become a very acute problem in our own times. And it's a reminder again about how works, classic works, actually acquire new meaning. You know, this is one reason why we do not give up the classics, because classics are always news in Ezra Pound's words. So today, I myself have read and taught Oedipus Rex for a number of years, and I didn't even really consider the starting point of the play. The plague. When the plague comes, I thought that was just the starting point, a plot device really, to get the story started. The plague had no meaning for me. But now when I look back, I'm more arrested by the plague than the other things that happen in the play. And Oedipus assumes responsibility. In fact, at the end of the play, he blinds himself. There's a horrible scene in which, fortunately for us, that scene happens off stage, not on stage. It happens off stage, but Oedipus blinds himself. Now, governmental responsibility, I said, one of the things about COVID-19 is that we have seen that it is a dictator's dream, COVID-19. Remember, there were those agitations and movements against, for instance, the Citizen Amendments Act, the Citizen Amendment Bill in Northeast particularly had a number of agitations. Now, whatever your political position, and let's not go into politics here, always a bit sensitive, but we have seen that, gatherings are not possible now. So political action is not possible in a sense. And COVID-19, we have seen that the governments that have been most successful in countering the pandemic have interestingly been authoritarian governments. I'm thinking about China now. I'm thinking about Singapore. I'm thinking about a country like North Korea. And democracies have had more problems actually dealing with this current pandemic. Now, when we read literature, and after this current pandemic, life will never be the same again. We know that in many ways, our lives will not be the same. I think even our reading will not be the same. And as I said, when I read Oedipus Rex now, I read it rather differently. I look at the plague more, more sensitively than I used to in the past. I think this is going to happen a lot, that when you read now, you will read with pandemic eyes, as it were. And this happened to me when I was reading Camus' The Plague. It is a wonderful work, but one of the things I found lacking in it was politics. The kind of politics that I'm talking about now, and the kind of politics that you have in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, that is missing in Camus' The Plague. The story is more focused on metaphysical elements and things like that. But there is a part, it's also a philosophical novel, because there is a part where Camus says something very interesting. He says that human beings cannot actually understand an epidemic or a pandemic. It's beyond the measure of men. And that is very true. That is very true. And this is what I mean. This is a good example of what I said before, that literature gives a kind of meaning. Literature is a way that we sort of approach life. It shows off it makes us sensitive to certain things. And we then look at life with somewhat different ideas. It gives you a perspective on life, if you like. Now, as I said, he says that human freedom is not possible. The pandemic makes this clear to us. Now, that's a very interesting idea, because Camus' name is often mentioned in the same breath as Jean-Paul Sartre, who gave us a new version of existentialism. Now, in existentialism, there is something called bad faith. That means we all have cells, but the cells that we have are conventional. And existentialism believes that you can throw off your conventional self and find your true self. Okay, this is existentialism. But in the play, Camus says something quite different. He says human agency is not possible. This idea that you're a free agent, no longer possible in an epidemic or in a pandemic. And if you think about it, yes, it's so difficult now for us to plan 6 months down the line. So many of us, of my audience must be students, and you're waiting for your exams, or maybe you have completed your exams, and then you have something else in mind, but you cannot plan. We have to put off our marriages, we have to put off our academic year. Nothing is possible. Human freedom. We all like to believe that we're human, we are free beings, and that we have a role. that we are the masters of our own destiny. But that does not seem to be possible in a pandemic, where in a sense your future has been taken away from you. So Camus' Plague has this very interesting idea. And he seems to be saying something that is quite the opposite of what Jean-Paul Sartre, for instance, believed, the human capacity to build a new self. Another kind of politics, this is in Daniel Defoe's The Journal of the Plague Year. And in this Journal of the Plague Year, it's almost a kind of journalistic work. It's very, very fact-based. And one of the things that happens in that work, if you've seen it, is that there are certain tables that are given. Just like today, nowadays we have, every day we have the count. How many people have been affected, how many cured, how many died. In those days, the newspapers are not very common, but in the evening, they would publish a sheet on which you would have the number of people dying of plague in the year 1665. And they would be published every evening. So there was a certain order to this, that every evening you'd get a piece of paper telling you that so many people have died in London. Now, today when we read literature, Shakespeare also, Dr. Johnson read Shakespeare, and he read him in a different way. You and I read Shakespeare, but we read him in a different way. We read him through the lens of gender. We read him as post-colonial readers. We read him in so many different ways. Our reading is not the same as Dr. Johnson's reading. So we have different concerns. One of the concerns we have is gender, and we're very gender sensitive. Now, if you look at Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year, and if you look at the number of people dying, when we read not only for what is on the page, we also read about the silences, what is not being said. That is something that deconstruction has taught us. Look for the silences, look for that which is not said. Deconstruction, new historicism, post-colonialism, feminism, all of these approaches, in fact, encourage us to look for that which is not said clearly. And if you look at the Journal of the Plague Year, what you find is that list of people dying, but it is a list of white men dying. Because if you're a woman, they did not count you. If you're a person of color, they did not count you. And please remember that at this point in 1660, London actually had a number of colored people. Dr. Johnson, for instance, had a colored servant. So you already have slaves in London. But if a slave died, or if a colored person died, if a colored servant died, a black servant died, his name would not appear in that list. So it's, what kind of a list is it? It's what you might call a fake list. And today, again, we have the same business, don't we? That there is underreporting. Many countries of the world, in India included, there's a charge that the number of cases is much, much more. And there is some kind of underreporting that is going on. So this is not something new. You have it in Defoe, but in Defoe you have a gender problem. All right, and then I come then to my next slide, which is that reading after COVID-19 will never be the same again. I was reading a novel recently. It's a novel that is not usually taught in our classrooms, Arnold Bennett's Clayhanger, published in 1910. And there is a part in the novel where two characters discuss the difference between epidemic, pandemic, and endemic. Now, in any other time, had I been reading this novel, I would have quickly passed over this page, just one page. It occupies a whole page, but I think I would have just gone through this very quickly. Now reading today, in the year 2020, I'm reading this 1910 novel, and I was simply arrested by this passage because it's exactly my experience. When the pandemic first happened, I myself went to the dictionary. In the novel, they take down a physical dictionary. I had gone to an online dictionary to find out the difference between pandemic, epidemic, and endemic. And so, as I said, what will happen is that you and I will become now, we have already become more sensitive to pandemic. And when we read, our reading will be different from what it was previously. You will no longer read Camus' The Plague in the way that you read him earlier. You will not be reading Daniel Defoe, Love in the Time of Cholera, or Sophocles' Oedipus Rex in the way that you read before. You will be reading new things. You'll be seeing new meaning. And this is another thing about literature, that somehow literature is able to hold all these meanings. You know, something that happened in the year 2020 is actually already there in a sense in these texts. So therefore the argument for carrying on, why has mankind not given up poetry and literature, even in a scientific age? Precisely for these reasons, because literature gives us meanings, and it gives us some very complex meanings and connections that you might not get from other sources. So then we are then in the first pandemic of the information age. Our reading, like our lives, will never be the same again. There are surprising continuities, and there are also differences between the texts, that pandemic-related texts. I think on the research front, because ours is also an age of research, there are more PhD students now. There's more of a professional interest in literature now, thanks to all the English departments and universities and colleges. So what we can expect then is an explosion of interest in literature and its links to body, to disease, to medicine. We'll be looking at, as I was saying, I've said it, I think two times already, that we'll be looking at all of these things much, much more carefully. Already there's a lot of interest in the body. Well, I find a lot of research scholars nowadays are talking about the body, a lot of research on the body. Now there will be more of that. And along with the body, I think disease, how disease has been represented in literature, how medicine has been represented in literature, all of that is going to be of great interest, and people are already working. And as I said, there will be an explosion of COVID novels. Again, ours is an age of productivity, of greater professionalism. So whereas previously you may have had one work or two works dealing with a pandemic or an epidemic, and in fact we saw that some major novelists like Hemingway, Fitzgerald, ignored the Spanish flu of 1918. I don't think it'll be possible for our writers today, because the expectations are different. Our writers today will not, in fact, at the very moment, I suspect someone somewhere is working on his or her COVID novel. So I'm sorry my slides didn't work. That would have lent greater clarity to some of the things that I've been saying. But I hope that what I have said is sort of echoes some of your own thoughts and feelings and reading experiences. And also, if I'm sure that some of the things I said are not exactly what you came to hear, and you may have grave reservations about that, that's perfectly fine, because in literature, unlike in maths, there are no right answers as such. And so questions are always welcome, especially if you don't disagree, if you don't agree with me. And I think, let me then, at this point, I think I've been speaking for roughly an hour. So let me at this point, end my formal presentation and invite questions. When I was talking to Dr. Nath, he said that we should keep about half an hour or so for questions and additions and comments from your side. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das, sir, for your informative speech, informative talk, resourceful speech. So our session is still continuing. So now I request all the participants to put their questions on what our resource persons are, he has presented. So I request Arunab Setia, already he has allowed the participants. Okay, thank you. So they are participants, respected participants. So you may put questions in the chat box regarding whatever sir has already spoken. So we shall try to catch the question. So now an announcement, this question and answer session. So it will be led by our joint conveners, Mr. Ramesh Shah and Biziard Baglari sir from Masbat College. So they will also help us. So together we shall try to catch the questions from the chat box, and we shall present it to our sir. So this half an hour session, it is kept for the question and answer. So we shall try to catch the questions now. So I request Vijayat Burglary, Ramesh sir, and Jayanta Kolita. So all of you, please try to catch the questions.
Yes, Mr. Inkunat, I have already catch one question from the chat box. That is, could you mention poetry on pandemics? Sir, could you hear me?
Poetry on pandemic.
Yeah, sir.
Poetry on pandemic, actually, the Wasteland, T.S. Eliot's Wasteland was written in those years when the Spanish flu was on, 1918 to 1920. These were the years in which the Spanish flu was raging in Europe, in the world. And T.S. Eliot also, his Wasteland, you don't find a direct influence, all right? So you don't have a direct reference to the plague, to the Spanish flu. But if you consider the gloom of that novel, the sense that the world is ending, you can actually trace it. All these years, we had traced it to other things. We had traced it to a number of other things, all right? Including the decline of Western civilization. So that, but then now, as I said, when this is the wonderful thing about literature. The literature is always alive. Just when you think you have mastered a text, you suddenly realize there's another dimension in it. So in fact, I just recently, sort of understood this point, that the Wasteland is actually a pandemic-related work. And I'm going to go back to the Wasteland. I haven't had the time, but I will in fact, this session. And I will try to look at how that gloom of that particular, look at the very title, the Wasteland. The Wasteland. There's some of that, the sense of the waste, probably comes from the pandemic. That's one. Other pandemic, when we talk about pandemic literature, somehow we have been taught, the works that come to mind are novels. Reason for this is in a way that also the novel is descriptive in a way that poetry is not. All right. So I think that's why the novel is concerned with daily life. See, the novel finds its inspiration in daily life. So one of the very attractive things about the novel is that, Wordsworth and Coleridge, they wanted to write poetry using common language and finding their inspiration in common life. The famous preface to the Lyrical Ballads. That actually happens in the novel. That happens in the novel, The novel, why is the novel the novel? Because it's not a genre like the epic that has a pedigree. It has a kind of legacy. So the novel is precisely that. It's about ordinary life, everyday life. And that's why I think the novel has been more successful, or the novel has made it its business to depict pandemic. So you find it's much more difficult to find examples of pandemic in a more explicit way in poetry, though it's there, as I was saying, implicit in a work like T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And there will be others. I'm sure you'll be able to discover your own works, poetry, where you have that, particularly poetry written around that period, near and round about pandemics. So this again is something that calls for research and calls for a new kind of reading with different, more sensitively, with sort of pandemic trained eyes, as it were. So that's why literature can be so interesting and so exciting, and you can never really master literature in that sense. Okay, I'm very glad that you're asking questions, because I was a bit put off by the fact that I couldn't give you my slides. And so, but this gives me an opportunity to interact with you and say certain things that I may have missed out on during the course of my talk.
Yeah, sir, it is a technical issue that you could not present the slides, but you tried to explain the matter. So we hope our participants, they are already benefited. So another question I have got from one participant, Yogita Rana. So he had put the question. I read out the question. Vedas are considered as the ancient literature,
Yes.
Ved. So Vedas are considered as the ancient literature. Do they also reflect on such pandemic?
This is from who? Who's
It is a question. The question, it is put by Yogita Rana.
Okay, thank you so much. for this question. And I have to confess that I do not have the expertise to answer your question. I did say that during my talk, that my domain has been, for better or for worse, has been English literature, Western literature. But I would be, so I am not really in a position to answer that question, but I was also asking myself, this is also a kind of colonialism that is happening, that somehow we know more about Western texts, you know. And when you ask me a question about our own pandemic related works, I'm at a loss. So it's also partly colonial, but I cannot believe, it's simply difficult to believe that the Vedas would have no reference to pandemics. Pandemics have been there. Some form of pestilence has been there since the beginning. And it's difficult for me to imagine that the Vedas would not refer to it at all. I'm sure there is. But you know, one of the things that you find in Indian traditions, you know, we have elderly relatives, your grandmother, mother. Have you noticed how in their lives, they do the kind of sanitizing that we do now? You know, cleaning of the house, being very careful about changing the clothes, bathing. And some such practices are actually sanctified by the Vedas and our holy texts. And some of that surely has an origin in these diseases and pandemics and epidemics that were prevalent down the ages and in antiquity. I'm sure there is.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Am I audible? Yes, sir. I have taken one question from YouTube.
All right.
Okay, sir. So one of our esteemed participant from our college, Honorable Gopal Dahal, sir, he has put the question. Our question is that, sir, can we have some light on the epic era pandemic? If there is any, please. Sir?
Epic era.
Sir,
Yeah.
Can we have some light on the epic era pandemic?
Epic era would be,
sir.
yeah, epic era, which epic era are you talking about? Indian or Western?
So it is not mentioned. Sir only put the questions. Can we have light upon epic era pandemic?
Epic era, I assume, the question relates to antiquity, ancient times. Epic era. Well, of course, I have referred, as I said, my specialization has been English literature, and I don't really, and I think we should always stick to what we know rather than what we do not know. I think I have answered that question to some extent in my talk, where I concentrated on very old works going back to 2,500 years, or you know, like I was talking about Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. I was talking about Thucydides. So these are epic era works. But I suspect he might probably be thinking about Indian epic era. And as I said, that's not really domain, but there was a related question on Vedas, Vedic Vedas. There was a related question. And I said that I'm sure the Vedas carry traces of the epidemics and practices, particularly social practices, how to avoid epidemics. That, I mean, I think is a thread that you have in many of these Vedic, slokas and so on and so forth. So that is my answer. And actually, I'm probably not the right person to really delve into this because, as I said, it's not really quite my domain. You need someone who really is well-versed in Sanskrit and other, maybe Tamil, that kind of very old literature to really answer that question.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from Dr. Ranjana Malhotra. Sir, that is another question from Dr. Ranjana Malhotra. In the Indian context, do you think the migrant situation will inspire literature?
See, as Professor Bajpai pointed out in inaugural comments, literature always has a social or historical context. So this migration that you're talking about It surely will, because it's a traumatic experience. You see, one of the things about the pandemic is it is also traumatic. Trauma always finds an outlet in literature. All right, trauma. It may be personal trauma, it may be a society's trauma, it may be a culture's trauma. So it will find its way. But the difference between journalism and literature is that journalism gives it to you first, in a sense. Literature will reflect it, but it will happen a little more after, because you also need a certain amount of, I think the creative process is such that you need to also digest the experience and write about it. Sometimes you find that great novels about the war are written not during the war, but afterwards, when people find the time to reflect and think about it. So definitely the answer we can be very positive about. There will be that kind of literature that you are talking about, simply because that migration, which is part of this pandemic, was actually a very traumatic experience for not only for the migrants, but also for others who felt guilty about our comfortable lives. So that will definitely find an outlet in literature sooner than later, probably.
Thank you, sir.
But here is a question. There is a question.
I'll take it.
Sir. Yeah, Baglari sir, continue it.
Yes, sir. I want to put forward this question to Das sir.
Yes.
And the question is, what type of influence will be of literature which has been created during COVID-19 pandemic on students and generation next?
Yes, as I was saying, there is already a novel that has come out called Summer by Ali Smith. It just came out the other day. It's a novel that deals with the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So as I said, in my talk, I tried to give you a list of works, very old works that have dealt with the plague and etc. But this pandemic that we are in today, the first pandemic of the 21st century, is very different from other pandemics. One of the things that I found when I was reading Albert Camus' The Plague, there is a character in that novel, a journalist, who comes to the small town of Oran. And then because of the plague, he finds that he cannot go back home. And he misses his wife terribly. Now that is a part of the novel that to me felt outdated, because today we have social media, we have cell phones. So that character would have immediately been in touch with his wife on Facebook, on Twitter, via the cell phone. So our current pandemic is also different from previous pandemics. Another thing, we are like about 200 people now, all in our own homes, but we are interacting. So, technology has also made a difference to our lives. Technology has, in so many ways, it has made many of us are getting online. So our current pandemic is also different from previous pandemics. And there will be a hunger, there will be a demand for novels that reflect our contemporary pandemic. Rather than, you'll of course read Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. You will read Daniel Defoe. But we will also demand books that more accurately, in a way, reflect. Because one of the pleasures of literature is also the pleasure of recognition. When somebody writes a novel, say, yeah, based on your town. Let's say you live in a town somewhere, and somebody has written a novel on that town as a background. There's a certain pleasure of recognition that, oh yes, this is I know this. It was like this, indeed true. That I think we are waiting for that, and there will be. I can tell you that. In fact, as I was saying, there's already an article in the paper, the Guardian newspaper, which you can check out. Yesterday's. Go to Guardian Books on the net and search for it. Already, it's been predicted that there will be a stream of works on COVID-19. In fact, the title of that article is "The COVID-19 Novels Are Arriving." That is the title of the article.
Sir, hello, sir.
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
I want to forward one question, sir.
Please do.
Please. Sir, question is from Aleka Gandai.
Yes.
Sir, can literature really solve the problem of COVID-19 pandemic?
All right. Okay.
I repeat the question, sir, please. Can literature solve the problem of COVID-19 pandemic, sir?
I can hear you, Dr. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
so much. Yes,
Okay.
that's a good question. And I began with that question,
Sure.
I couldn't show the slide. But my point was that literature makes nothing happen. You know,
Sure.
W.H. Auden said that. W.H. Auden, as you know, wrote an elegy on another great poet, W.B. Yeats. And in the course of that poem, he says, poetry makes nothing happen. And that is indeed true. You know, you cannot contribute in the way that a colleague in the sciences can. In my university, my colleagues, scientific colleagues were making PPE, they were making hand sanitizers, they were contributing in a very real way. And you as a literature person or literature cannot make that kind of contribution. But then I also refer to the sad case of Sushant Singh Rajput. You know, this is what happens when you lose meaning in life. You know, you opt out of life. When you lose meaning, you see no reason to go on with your life. And literature rescues us from that. Literature actually gives you a kind of meaning in life. The answers may be very different. Different writers have given us different kinds of perspectives. But human beings are actually meaning-making creatures. You cannot go through life without some kind of meaning. You know, most of us believe our lives have meaning, and we always, you know, and often we go to literature. Sometimes some problems are very complex, like say this COVID-19 situation. So literature will not give you a vaccine, but it will make you sensitive to certain things. It will make you sensitive to certain things, and it will give you certain ways and means. So literature then becomes a resource in itself. Literature becomes a resource in itself. And that is my answer to you. You know, I can't give you an answer in the way that a scientific colleague would have by producing a vaccine. No, but that is not what we should expect from literature also.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
So any more
Okay, I'm glad
questions?
that I was able to take these questions because it's sort of some things were not clear perhaps as I was speaking. So I get an opportunity to sort of clarify. That's very good. Thank you.
Here is a question I want to put forward to Dr. Das, sir.
Yes.
That question has been raised by Sanjit Sorgiari. And the question is,
Okay.
sir, do you think that pandemics are the angry agents of sometime angry nature?
Indeed so. Indeed. Science is telling you that, but literature also. And when I say literature, let me talk about a very fundamental text of Western civilization, the Bible, King James Version. You go to Genesis, and in Genesis, you have a description of how the world was created by God. But there is a line there that God actually, I've forgotten the exact line, but the line meaning is this, that God has created the world for man's use, for man's use. So Adam is told that go out, the world is yours. Now that is exactly the attitude that has brought us to this current crisis. The world is not for us to use. In other words, today we are understanding with environmentalism as a movement now, we understand that this is a world that we do not dominate. It's not for our use. We are not the most superior creatures. We need to coexist with other people, with other creatures. So in a sense, use the world, yes, but responsibility. This is not what we've been doing. And Western capitalism, particularly, has been very wasteful of the planet's resources. We have literally used up the world's resources. So, you know, that warning is also, so sometimes, and then I was talking about Mary Shelley's The Last Man. There is a warning there. I was talking about the more famous work, Frankenstein, where she's actually warning you. She's telling you that science has become too arrogant. Science is playing God, and science has created this monster. Irresponsible science. So literature is giving you these warnings, and literature is telling you this, that yes, there is a responsible way of leading your life. And there's certain things that you shouldn't be doing.
Thank you, sir. Baglari, sir, any more questions you have picked up?
Yes, there is, okay. There is
You are not audible, Baglari, sir.
okay. I think I am audible now.
Yes,
now
now
you are.
audible.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
I want to put forward one question to the sir.
Yes,
And
please.
the question is raised by Priyanka Basumotari, and the question is, Albert Camus in his novel The Plague used the plague as an allegory for war, a reflection on the Nazi occupation of France, and the
True,
stubborn acts of resistance against it. Please share your thoughts on this.
Yes, this is a good question to ask. And yes, indeed true. The Plague, is a much read book. And we've always been reading The Plague, and we've been taking the plague, the actual plague that happens in that novel. And we have understood the plague as a symbol of resistance to the Nazis. Indeed, you're right. And it is there. That is definitely one of the ways you can read the novel. I'm not saying no. But then we never thought of the plague as real. We thought it was a literary device. Literature employs symbols. So we thought here is Camus using the plague as a kind of symbol. But what has happened now is that the symbol is no longer a symbol for us. It's become real because we live in this time, COVID-19 times. And for us, when you read the novel, I read the novel many years ago in my youth. And then I was reading it indeed in the way that you say. I mean, why is Camus using a plague? And the plague also seemed to be a very outdated disease, in fact, because plagues are from ancient times, they are medieval times. And we thought that we had crossed all that. We never imagined, none of us could have imagined that you would be sitting at home because of a little virus, because of a pandemic, a global pandemic. It's keeping us. Countries have locked down. This was something that we could not have imagined back even in January and even in February, really, early part of February. Now, when I read the plague, I read it differently. I don't read it so much with that idea of Nazi resistance. But for me, the plague has now moved from being just a literary device to something really real. It's about the plague now. The plague is not about the Nazis for me now, as it were. It is now about COVID-19. And this is how texts are never stable. Texts that's a wonderful thing about texts, that text can hold. Someone reading it back 10 years ago, or even last year, would have read it as a novel about resistance to the Nazis. You would have read it that way. He or she would have read it that way. Today, you can't read it that way. So your reading has changed. The novel remains, but the meanings that you see in it are different. And this is the wonderful thing about literature, that often literature has meanings in it that you don't see until, as now, something happens, and then you see it, and you see it anew.
Okay, thank you, sir. Another question I have picked up.
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. The question it is put forward by Ruli Smita.
Oh, really?
So yeah, sir, she has put the question. So I read out the question. Just a minute, sir. So the question is, sir, do you think there will be some changes in diasporic literature too after this pandemic? I repeat the question.
Yeah.
Sir, do you think there will be some changes in the diasporic literature too after this pandemic?
Okay. Thank you, Ruli Smita. Yeah, there will be. Now, diaspora is a much research topic. Lots of students are working on diaspora. When we teach in the classroom, diaspora is a big theme. It's a research theme. But diaspora also has received a new twist, as it were, because in many countries, the first people who are suspected of carrying the virus have been people from diaspora, people from other communities. You have seen that in our own country, where you suspect certain communities of carrying the virus. Some people are blamed for being carriers of the virus. And this has happened abroad, also in diasporic countries where there are large migrants. So migrants have always been seen as a threat. And with COVID-19, I think it has added another dimension to that. So indeed, I think diasporic literature is going to reflect this. Diasporic literature that will be written now will reflect it. Perhaps it is already there. As I said, when we used to read diaspora before, we probably never read it from this angle. Now, if you go back to some of that diasporic literature, it may already be there. We often, even without a pandemic, we sometimes suspect some people of being being sort of negative influences, and that negative could also be in a medical sense, in the sense of disease carrying communities as being less hygienic and so on and so forth. So yes, definitely, I think it will be there. So one more dimension that has been added.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I request Arunabh Setia, please unmute our participants so that they can ask questions directly. So we are trying to catch the questions. So we shall pick up questions from chat box, and at the same time, the participants they can ask question directly. But at this time, I also request the honorable participants to mute themselves when they are not asking any question. So now I request Arunabh Setia to allow the participants to unmute themselves, and so that they can ask question directly. So then our session will become a lively one. And I request Baglari sir and Ramesh sir to catch questions if there are any. So, okay, participants, now if you have any questions, so you can ask our resource person sir directly. Until then, we can continue questions from chat box. So, Baglari sir, do you have any question with you?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a question that I want to put forward to Das sir.
Yes.
The question has been raised by Dr. Povitro Bharali. And the question is, the stream of consciousness technique can prove to be a very effective method for expressing the psychic state of people of pandemic times. What's your observation, sir? So that's the question, sir.
Yes, for some reason, the stream of consciousness technique has not been used in recent years. I'm not aware of many people using it. I think there was a writer called Roddy Doyle who did that. That was also about 20 years back. For some reason, yeah. But then the stream of consciousness technique is very...
Hello, sir. Hello.
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 Yes.
Good evening, sir.
Okay, yeah.
Can I proceed my question to the resource person?
Please, can you just give me Mr. Sharma, can you just give me a minute? I was one question, so just give me 1 minute. Let me finish my question to answer to that, to someone who asked a question. All right?
Okay, sir.
Yeah, just to give me a minute. So yeah, but there is this novel that I teach, Mrs. Dalloway, which is a stream of consciousness novel. One of the things that we find is that it has the issue of mental health. So I think stream of consciousness technique particularly lends itself well to inner states, to mental health issues. So I think those issues that are related to the COVID-19 mental health issues, that particularly I think stream of consciousness technique can handle very, very efficiently. I believe that, yes. Okay, I've answered that question and I can answer now Mr. Anil Kumar Sharma's question. Please, if you're online, you can ask.
Hello, sir.
Yes, hello.
Yes,
I can
can I
hear you.
proceed my question, sir?
Yes, you can. Most certainly.
Okay, sir. Sir, you are welcome. Sir, actually, maybe it is considered as a question or maybe as a general information to be communicated in all literature for persons. So what type of literature has been generated or created during the pandemic COVID-19? Especially, yes, sir. Am I audible or not, sir?
Yes, you are. I can hear you perfectly.
Yes, sir. So what type of the impact or influence will be on the students in current situation or the generation next? Or I want to clarification to what type of the literature has been generated during the pandemic, maybe as a qualitative or not, sir?
That is a question that we can answer not now, but some years from now. But what your question actually points to, in fact, this is very interesting. And I was trying to sort of explain some of that we are in a new age, right?
Yeah.
21st and in the 21st century, our means of recording are different. So what is going to happen is there's going to be a lot of information about COVID-19 because everything is recorded, everything is described. You have the technology, you have the internet. So, there will be a lot of information, but information is not literature in itself. And when you read, why do we still go back to and read Peeps Diary? I mean, what is the connection between our lives and 1665 England? Thing is that literature somehow gives you a better record in some ways of what it means like to live in that historical moment. There is also history. History is there. So what is the function of literature? History will tell us, historical records will tell us that in the year 2020, there was a COVID-19 pandemic. But what literature will do is tell you what it was like to actually live in that moment. What Anil Kumar Sharma, an individual, felt, experienced on the 9th of August, 2020. That will come from literature. So historical records will tell you, so if some say 99 people die in a war somewhere, in a battle somewhere, history will tell you 100 people died. But literature is interested not in the 100 people who died. Literature is actually interested in the individual experience. Now, I was talking about Peeps Diary. When I read Peeps Diary, I find that there is a parallel between what he's saying and what I'm experiencing. I'm a fortunate man. I live and work in a university campus. I am safe. In many ways, my interaction with people is minimal. And in a way, I have not really been very badly affected by COVID-19. But there are so many of our countrymen. There was a question just now, some minutes ago, about the migration problem, the migrants, the people who suffered so much. Businesses have been destroyed, livelihoods have been destroyed, people's lives have been very badly affected, and some may never recover. So here I have, my life is going on more or less smoothly in the midst of so much of turmoil and so much of death and destruction. Now, what happens then when you read your Peeps Diary? 1665 was a good year, mind you. 1665, the year of the Great Plague, was a good year for Samuel Pepys. because in that year he made more money, his business prospered. He tells you that. So there you have a man who's recording that people around him are dying and he himself is afraid at times that he might die. But in the end, it was a good year for him. So this peculiar mixture, this is life. And this is this reality, this kind of quality of life, somehow literature captures it. You know, the contradictory and the complex dimensions, the feeling that of guilt, that I'm doing well, my people around me are dying. What do I do? What have I done to deserve this good fortune? What have those people done to deserve their bad fortune? There are no easy answers to this, but these complexities are very well reflected in literature. And I suspect that many people are keeping diaries, writing, literary pieces, short stories, novels, and that much of that will reflect what it meant to live in the year 2020 in India during the COVID-19 pandemic. So literature will give you that more than historical records. I've answered that question. I can take more if you want.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Ramesh sir, if you have picked up any question, please present it.
Right now, I haven't seen any from the YouTube. So I'm
there is a question. There is a question, not sir.
Yes, please.
Okay,
I would like to forward to Dr. Das, sir.
Yes, I can.
The question has been raised by Profullo Panda, and his question is,
all right.
Sir, would you please tell how far is teaching literature to students through online mode effective in your view? That's the question, sir.
It's not directly related to the topic, but then it's a good question. It's a good question. How is literature? Well, one of the things that we did a survey in our university, Tejpur University, we did a survey of our students. Interestingly enough, most of them have said that they prefer traditional teaching and they want to come back to the traditional class. One of the things that I'm grateful for is that for many years, we have been told that the universities and colleges of the future will be digital universities, digital colleges. Thanks to, and somehow I never did anything about it. All right. But because of the circumstances, I was forced to go and take online classes. And I find that there are benefits. Had there been no technology, had there been no online means, then we could not have maintained continuity in our teaching. See, last semester in my university, students were sent away in the middle of March. But after that, we kept in touch with them. And though not satisfactory, perhaps fully satisfactory, we were able to keep our classes going. Not all the students were able to join because we know there are problems. I myself had problems today, for instance, my slides didn't work and I was cut off at some point. So there were these problems were there, but at least we were able to keep up some continuity. The other thing is that, right now I'm sitting in my chair and very comfortably I'm answering. It's almost like a chat that I'm having with you. Now, in all my classroom interactions, all these years, and I've taught for 30 years or more, I've always stood. I believe in standing in front of my students. There's a reason for that. It's less boring for them. If you stand and you walk a bit and you move around a bit, the students pay more attention to you than if you sit down. There is that kind of difference in my teaching now. I'm sitting in a chair, and when I teach, it's more like a cozy kind of interaction. So there is a difference in the quality of the teaching. And when things resume, to answer your question, when things resume, just like the reading will never be the same again, life will never be the same again, teaching will never be the same again. I think all of us are going to go back to the classroom, physical classroom, of course, we are going to do that. But I will continue to use online means. For instance, I can send books to my students very easily through Google Classroom. There are many things that the technology enables. I can share videos with my students. through online means, through Google Classroom or other online means. So what will happen is there's going to be a blended approach. When things normalize, sooner or later they'll normalize. And then it will be a case of blended teaching. I will keep up some things I will deliver online to my students because it's easy to assess certain things. Electronic text, for instance. Texts are a continuous problem in India. If you're teaching somewhere, there's always a complaint that the text is not available. I can make electronic text available. So there are certain advantages to online teaching, including in teaching of literature. And so there again, then I've given you a kind of what you might call a blended answer, both yes and no.
Thank you, sir. So, respected participants, so you can put questions directly. So already we have unmuted yourself. You may unmute and ask question. So already we have forwarded so many questions to our resource person, sir, and he has already given all the answers. So if any questions are there, so the participants then they can unmute themselves and they can put question directly, or otherwise we shall go to the concluding part of this session now.
Excuse me, sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, I would like to discuss a small thought that came up in my mind as I was attending the session.
Okay.
Hello?
Hello, yes.
Sir, the COVID experiences are different to different people. And
Yes.
since being a pandemic, it is something that has affected the entire world. And so people belonging to different countries will be having different experiences to talk about. And when it comes to the same country, people belonging to different sections of the society still have stories of their own. And you have said that there are lots of works coming up describing this COVID experiences, COVID pandemic, etc. At the same time, what I feel is like only or maybe the benefited section will be the ones that are coming up with the books or written expressions of their own COVID experiences. So can we take these writings to be the true picture of the condition today? Will literature be able to cover the experiences of all? So my question is like, so what is your take if I say that we are only getting the half truth from literary expression and the other half is already hidden?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, can I answer now? You want to say something more?
If someone from the next century or so happen to read about the works of COVID pandemic that are being written now, will they get the true picture of the real experiences of people, of different people?
Yeah, okay. Can I answer now? Oh, yeah.
Okay,
all right. Let me try to answer your question. One of the good things is that there are more people of different backgrounds writing now than before. So this is happening in all professions, that there's a kind of diversification. Women's writing now. There, in fact, one of the questions that I'm getting on my feed here from one of my students, she's asking about what about women? Now, women's experience of COVID-19 probably different from a man's experience. Simply, I've noticed that women are working much harder now because they're running households without domestic help, for instance. Just one example. So clearly, as you say, everyone's experience cannot be the same. And in fact, there will be a divergence of experiences. We've also, I think, indicated that there are underprivileged people who may not have the scope to express themselves. And that, say, 100 years from now, if you look back, you might get a very a lopsided picture of the COVID-19 situation. But, ours is an age of democracy, and I don't use that word lightly. There is a democratization of literature that is going on. All right. And people from all sections are now actually getting to write about their experiences. And we, in fact, look forward to reading from marginalized voices. A lot of feminism, a lot of post-colonialism is about that. Listening to marginalized voices. Deconstruction, for instance, has made us sensitive to meanings that are suppressed or not expressed, that doesn't get an opportunity. So my feeling is that I think we'll have a diversified kind of a set of works, people writing from different perspectives. And I think there is a climate now where these works are going to probably have a more sympathetic reception than before. For just to give you an example, women's writing was actually looked down upon. Women were not supposed to be able to write. Colored people were not expected to write. But all of that has changed in the last 200 years or so. And there is now, I still agree, there are problems even now. Still there is privilege. There is still nepotism even in the, this industry, book publishing industry. But I think there will be more diversified writing now. And we in fact look forward, like you probably would look forward to that kind of writing, the kind of writing that you've indicated. So there is a kind of readership also. Secondly, when I say literature, and probably we shouldn't just be working with this idea of literature as the, text, like the novel published by a mainstream publisher. I think there will also be, if you broaden your definition of literature to include folk tales or the kind of songs sung by workers, people working in the countryside, that kind of song, laborers' songs. If you sort of expand your idea of a text and you include such kind of writings, songs sung composed perhaps even by illiterate people, then you might get a more complete kind of a picture, the kind of picture that you are sort of saying that we might not get. You might not be a complete picture, of course, but if you look at those voices, I think there'll be a lot of voices expressing. And the reason for that is that it has been a traumatic experience, and trauma always finds an outlet in creativity, this kind of creativity. So in song, in urban legends, new modern myths, and of course in novels, perhaps in poems, you will find, I think, a kind of diversification of what it was like over the COVID-19 experience, probably.
Thank you, sir. So if there is not any question from participants, so we shall go to the concluding part of this session today. So is there any question from participants? So for the last time, I am requesting the participants, if there is any question, so they can put forward. Okay. Madam, your voice is not properly audible. So, madam, we request you to ask the question once again. Because of maybe for weak network, we are not able to hear your question properly. So I request Prasanto Das sir whether he has heard the question or not.
No, I couldn't hear the question. I could not hear it.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So this question and answer session, it was led by Baglari sir, Vijayat Baglari, and Ramesh sir. So if they do not have any question, so we can go to the concluding part now. Baglari sir and Ramesh sir.
One more question that I want to put forward to Das sir, Professor Das sir.
Okay, Baglari sir, please.
And that question is raised by Ruli Samita, and the question is, sir, is there any difference in the representation of the condition of women from the perspective of a male and female writer?
Ruli Smita, I did refer to Daniel Defoe, the Journal of the Plague Year. And there I said that when he's writing and he's giving you figures of people who died in the plague, those figures are not reliable figures. because what you have there is that he is giving you only figures of men who died, and women are not mentioned because in those days they did not count women. You know, the figures, the king was interested in how many people were dying because there was a question of taxes. So male heads of families would pay taxes. Women did not pay taxes. So the simple reason is, so those figures that he gives you are actually not reliable. Now, today we know this because we look from a gender point of view. So there is a difference between the male experience of a pandemic or an epidemic and a woman's experience of pandemic. And if you read, as I said today, if you read these works, you find that missing. Even in Camus' work, for instance, there are no colored people there, for example. Women don't have a strong role there. So if a woman were to write about the pandemic, it would be a different kind of writing because women's experiences would be different from men's experiences. So there is a kind of gendered writing that is coming out, or or at least when you and I, not you, but when we read, we've been reading actually in a very limited way. So so today's writing, as I was trying to say, will be different because we are more sensitive now. But even the existing classical works that are there, we probably haven't read them very sensitively from a gender point of view. And the moment you do that, even Daniel Defoe's novel then becomes a very different kind of a novel. Okay, Dr. Baglari.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, yeah, Bijat Baglari.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
Sorry for interruption. We have to look to the time because due to time constraint, we cannot continue.
Yeah. Our resource person, sir, he is feeling quite tired because he is answering for so many times. We are observing it.
No, I'm not tired, but I think the participants are tired.
No, sir.
I can talk about literature, you know, but it's my.
Okay, sir.
I mean,
we don't have any time.
It's okay. I think yeah, we should have probably. I think they're tired. Some of them have been here for a long time. So yeah.
Okay, then.
Sir, we have not seen more questions in the chat box. So so I request Das sir to put your concluding remarks, sir, please.
Sir.
Okay. My concluding. Yeah. Yes. I think Dr. Saha has a question or something. Was saying something.
Sir.
Yes.
Before your concluding, I would like to put one sentence for you, sir.
Please do.
Sir, in Hemingway, The Old Man of the Sea, for you, yes. Sir. A man is made for destroy, but can't be defeated. It is going to you from my side, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Compliment from my side, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, my concluding comments would be that I'm very grateful to you, the organizers, the two departments of English. And I know that when you organize something like this, a number of people are involved. Some of them are behind the scenes. So I'm very grateful and I thank you very much. And I hope that when things normalize, we can actually meet in person. I'm sorry that there was a kind of malfunction on my side. I've been taking online classes. I never had this problem, but today I did for some reason. Unfortunate, but I think that last session, particularly, I enjoyed where participants were asking questions and I was able to respond to some of them. So I'm very grateful to you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your nice presentation. And though there is some technical problems from your side, especially for sharing the screen, still you presenting the session very nicely and in a very easy way. All the participants are enlightened, and it was really insightful and enriching. And thank you for that. and especially thankful to you that you accept our invitation and sharing your experiences and compelling thoughts with us and all the participants. So thank you once again. And now, as per agenda, I request Biziad Baglari, Department of English, to propose vote of thanks.
Collector sir, am I audible?
Yes, you're clear.
Okay. The one-day national webinar on the topic literature in pandemic times, jointly organized by Department of English and Education, Masbat College, and Department of English, Xavier College, has almost reached to a concluding part. So now, on behalf of the organizing committee, I have the pleasure and honor to extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to Dr. Anjali Baspe, ma'am. Ma'am was the inaugurator of this webinar, and we, the organizer, shall remain ever grateful to her for her gracious presence and on being the part of this webinar and inspiring and enlightening us with her inaugural speech, where she had thrown lots of light on the socio-cultural and religious values held by literature. So it were all great inspiration for us. We, the organizer, really thank Baspe ma'am for sparing time out of her busy schedule and on being part of this national webinar, for which we could successfully conduct it. So once again, thank you to Dr. Anjali Baspe ma'am. Secondly, I would like to extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to honorable resource person of today's national webinar, Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das, sir, Professor of English Literature, Tezpur University, and Dean of Humanities and Social Science. We are really grateful and thankful to Dr. Das, sir, for making this webinar a really informative and really educative learning experience. I'm sure all our participants have been really academically benefited by your resourceful presentation. You have rightly elaborated about the pandemic literature or literature of the pandemic time, right from the ancient to the modern, and have given a detailed description of various authors of various ages and their works, and how pandemic had ever been a part of human life and how it affected life and society and culture, even history across time, since time immemorial. And you have, sir, rightly pointed out the some important aspect related to literature of the pandemic times. You have rightly pointed out that it is going to attain a new meaning. It is going to attain a new meaning. Literature in general, English literature in particular, is going to attain a new meaning post this pandemic. And also, sir, you have rightly mentioned about the classic works that's going to acquire new meaning post-pandemic. And most importantly, that reading will never be the same again. Reading is going to acquire a new meaning, and it is going to have a critical discourses in the coming days in the literary arena. So once again, I, on behalf of the organizing committee, extend our sincere thanks to Dr. Das sir for your gracious presence as resource person of this national webinar. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to the principal, Dr. P.K. Sharma, sir, of Masbat College, and Mr. Tazem Ali, sir, Principal KVR College, for constant support and inspiration that you have given us for the successful conduct of this webinar. And at last, but not the least, I, on behalf of the organizing committee, would like to extend our sincere thanks to all the participants who have joined in this national webinar from across different parts of India, from different colleges, from different universities. Thank you so much. Without your participation, this webinar would not have been possible and successful. Hope all of you must have been benefited by attending this webinar, and wish your safe and bright future. With this, I would like to conclude my vote of thanks. Over to Polita, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Baglari, for your nice words to all the participants, resource person, and our respected guest. Thank you once again, and I also thank to you because from the very beginning preparation of this webinar, you have been continuously helping us and guide us and support us to success this webinar. So thank you, Vijay Baglari. Now I would like to give some announce declaration regarding our forthcoming webinar. There's a national webinar on 11/8/2020 on the topic "The Present Pandemic-Induced Crisis: Understanding from an Anthropological Perspective." This is from my department, the education department, which jointly organized with the MC College Borpeta, with the department, PG Department of Anthropology. And another international workshop on research methodology will be started from 11/8/2020 to 13/8/2020. Next international webinar on 12/8/2020 on the topic relevance of open book examination during COVID-19 pandemic. Former Vice Chancellor of Kakahandik State Open University, Professor Sinath Borua sir, will inaugurate the program, and Dean Academic Dr. Dibrojyoti Mohanto will be the keynote speaker, and Professor Zahid Mannan from Bangladesh will grace the occasion as resource person. And next international webinar on 14/8/2020 on the topic post-pandemic quality assurance in education. Professor Ramakanta Mohalik from Regional Institute of Bhubaneswar will be the keynote speaker, and Professor Gerardo Blanco from USA, Professor Nazi from North Africa, and Professor Faisal from Canada will grace the occasion as resource persons. So as the convener of these programs, I request you all to join all our forthcoming programs to discuss on the vital topics. Thank you once again, all the participants, resource person, and chief guest of today's webinar. And with these warm words, I request Mr. Inkunat to carry over the last part of this webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Inkunat.
Okay, thank you, Jantakalita. So already he has given announcement about our forthcoming program, and Dr. Biziad Baglari already he has given his nice words in the according to agenda, the vote of thanks. So from my side also, I offer my thanks to Dr. Anjali Madam, Dr. Prasanto Kumar Das sir, and along with it, I offer my thanks from my side to all my co-conveners, Mr. Joyanta Kolita, Mr. Biziad Baglari, Mr. Ramesa, our two principals, sir, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Sharma sir, and Tazem Ali sir. So I offer my own personal thanks to all of them. And along with it, I want to give an announcement that about our forthcoming webinars. Mr. Joyanta Kolita, he has already given information. So another information is that we have two more webinars in the coming days. One webinar will be on yoga. So it will be about the role of yoga regarding good health. And another webinar, it will be on English literature, not exactly English literature, but literature in common, and also related with our new education policies. So we shall give the informations on due time in our groups. And now, formally, I declare that this session, it is ended. So already we have come to the end of the session. So now we declare that the session is ended. So already we have given the feedback form. So the participants, they will receive their participation certificates. So those participants who have filled up the feedback form, so they will receive their certificates within 15 days. So we have taken 15 days of time, but before that, we shall be able to give them certificates. But here one announcement is that we shall provide certificates to only those participants who have filled the feedback form. Otherwise, no other request will be entertained hereafter. So